The temperature hit minus 38 degrees Fahrenheit on February 12, 1883, and the wind screaming down from the Continental Divide pushed it to something no thermometer could measure. In the mining settlement of Starvation Gulch, Colorado, 17 families huddled in their frame houses and log cabins while snow piled against walls already groaning under the weight. But 300 yards up the canyon, in a limestone cave that most folks had written off as foolishness, Henrik Bergstrom sat with his wife and 2 daughters in 72-degree comfort, listening to the storm try to kill his neighbors. 6 months earlier, nobody could have convinced the town council that a man living in a hole in the mountain would outlast them all. Least of all Marcus Webb, the settlement's founder who'd built 43 structures in 7 different territories and knew exactly how things ought to be done. Henrik had arrived in Starvation Gulch in April of 1882 with almost nothing. A Swedish immigrant who'd worked the iron mines of Michigan for 9 years, he'd saved enough to buy 80 acres of what most considered worthless land, the slope too steep for farming, too rocky for grazing, too far from the creek for easy water. What it did have was a cave. Not a small one either, but a natural limestone chamber running 62 feet into the mountainside, with a ceiling that averaged 11 feet high and a floor that stayed dry even during spring melt. The first time Henrik climbed up to inspect it, he stood at the entrance for close to an hour, just watching. The temperature inside hovered around 54 degrees, while the afternoon sun pushed the outside air to 87. When he stuck his hand into the cave's depths, the cool air flowing past his fingers told him something the textbooks he couldn't read would have confirmed: thermal mass. The mountain itself, millions of tons of limestone holding steady at the average annual temperature, ready to warm you in winter and cool you in summer if you were smart enough to work with it instead of against it. Marcus Webb wasn't impressed. "You planning to live like a bear, Bergstrom?" He'd ridden up with 3 other men from town, partly curious, partly concerned that a greenhorn was about to embarrass their settlement. The town founder stood well over 6 feet, with the kind of sun-weathered face that came from 2 decades on the frontier. He'd survived the Panic of 1873, helped fight off a Ute raid in 1879, and built the first sawmill in 3 counties. His judgment carried weight. "Not like a bear," Henrik said, his English still heavily accented. "Like a man who understands stone." Beside Webb stood Tobias Crenshaw, a former Union officer who'd homesteaded the creek bottomland and built what everyone agreed was the finest cabin in 20 miles. Squared logs, tight chinking, a stone chimney that drew like a dream. "You'll freeze come winter," Crenshaw said, not unkindly. "Cave stays cool in summer, sure, but it'll stay cool in winter, too. You need a proper structure, Bergstrom, something that can hold heat." The third man, Isaiah Lockett, nodded agreement. He'd failed at homesteading in Kansas, watched his first cabin blow away in an 1876 tornado, and rebuilt twice since coming to Colorado. He knew disaster when he saw it brewing. Stone draws heat right out of a place. Every miner knows it. You'll burn through more cordwood than the rest of us combined, assuming you can even get a fire going in there without smoking yourself out. But it was the 4th visitor who troubled Henrik most. Samuel Blackfeather, half Arapaho, half Irish, who'd grown up in these mountains and worked as a guide for survey crews. He'd seen men die from bad decisions. The old ones, my mother's people, they used caves for storage, never for living. There's wisdom in that, Mr. Bergstrom. Wisdom you might want to consider. Henrik listened to each man with the patience he'd learned in the mines, where arguing with the shift boss got you nowhere, but listening to the rock could save your life. When they'd finished, he pulled out the plans he'd sketched on butcher paper, weighted down with stones against the mountain breeze. What he'd drawn wasn't a cave. It was a cave plus 32 feet of carefully engineered structure. He'd build a stone wall across the cave entrance, creating a sealed chamber in the front section, with a smaller vestibule beyond that. Double doors, staggered, so cold air never blew straight through. A ventilation system using natural convection, drawing stale air up and out through a chimney, while fresh air came in low and warmed against the stone. A fireplace positioned to heat the front chamber, letting the thermal mass of the cave walls and floor absorb and radiate that warmth for hours after the fire died. Now, if you're watching this and thinking Henrik was onto something our ancestors understood but we've forgotten, you're exactly right. Hit that subscribe button because we're documenting these frontier techniques before they disappear entirely. The men who built America didn't have YouTube or building codes, just observation, experience, and the willingness to die if they got it wrong. You're overcomplicating it, Webb said, studying the drawings. Simple cabin, good chimney, plenty of wood. That's how we've survived 3 winters already. How much wood did you burn last year? Henrik asked. Webb shrugged. 7 cords, maybe 8, family of 4. I will burn 2, Henrik said. Maybe 3. Crenshaw laughed, not meanly, but with the confidence of a man who'd actually built something that worked. Impossible. I burned 9 cords last winter, and I've got the tightest cabin in the territory. You're talking about a space twice the volume, mostly uninsulated rock. The mathematics don't support it. But Henrik had done mathematics they hadn't considered. In the iron mines of Michigan, he'd worked tunnels that stayed at 54 degrees year-round, 600 feet down where the Earth's temperature stabilized. The deeper you went, the less the seasons mattered. This cave wasn't 600 feet deep, but it didn't need to be. That mass of limestone, holding steady at the average annual temperature of this elevation, roughly 48 degrees, would do most of the work. In winter, he wouldn't be trying to heat from 0 to 70. He'd be trying to heat from 48 to 70, and thermal mass would store that heat like a battery made of stone. They left him to his foolishness, though Webb made a point of riding back up 2 weeks later with an offer. I've got a lot at the south end of town near the creek. Flat ground, good drainage. I'll sell it to you for half what I paid, Bergstrom. You seem like a decent man. Hate to see you waste a winter in that hole. Henrik thanked him, but declined. He'd already started work, and once a Swede set his mind to something, you'd have better luck moving the mountain itself. The stone wall went up first. Henrik quarried limestone from an outcrop 200 yards away, splitting it along natural fracture lines with wedges and patience. Each block weighed between 80 and 200 pounds. He'd shape them roughly square, then fit them together with a mud mortar mixed from clay he dug near the creek, sand from a dry wash, and just enough water to make it workable. The wall rose slowly, 18 inches thick at the base, tapering to 14 inches at the top, standing 12 feet high and spanning the cave's mouth with just 2 openings, a doorframe 7 feet tall and 36 inches wide, and a smaller opening near the ceiling for the chimney. The work took him 97 days, working dawn to dusk. His wife Anna and their daughters, Martha and Ingrid, lived in a canvas tent pitched beside the construction site. They caught rainwater in barrels, cooked over an open fire, and helped Henrik however they could. Anna mixed mortar while the girls hauled smaller stones. Settlers passing by would shake their heads. A family living in a tent while the father built a wall to seal up a cave. It made no sense. Isaiah Lockett stopped by in July, ostensibly to trade some eggs for the 3 chickens the Bergstroms had brought from Michigan. Getting late in the season to be starting a dwelling, he observed, watching Henrik mortar another stone into place. First snow usually hits by October 15th. That's 78 days from now, and you haven't even framed a roof. Don't need a roof, Henrik said, pointing up at the cave ceiling. Already got one. 1,000,000 years old. Never leaked yet. What about the front section? That wall you're building? Logs across the top. Canvas over that until I can split shingles. Just needs to shed water, not hold up against snow load. The mountain does that part. Lockett wanted to argue, but he couldn't quite find the flaw in the logic. Instead, he asked about ventilation. You'll suffocate in there, or fill it with smoke. Probably both. Henrik climbed down from the scaffolding he'd built from pine poles and walked Lockett to the back of the cave. Near the ceiling, about 52 feet from the entrance, water had eroded a natural crack that ran upward into darkness. Henrik had enlarged it carefully until it opened onto the mountainside 40 feet above the cave mouth. Chimney, he said. Hot air rises, pulls fresh air in through the door. Anytime I have a fire, the draft pulls smoke up and out. Anytime the cave gets too warm, hot air escapes on its own. And when it's 40 below zero outside, then I close the damper, keep heat in, open it again when I need fresh air. Same as you do with your cabin, yes? It was the same, and Lockett knew it, but the scale troubled him. The entire cave system, front chamber and back, held roughly 24,000 cubic feet of air. His cabin held maybe 1,800. More air meant more to heat, simple as that. Unless, and this was the part that nagged at him, unless that massive volume of stone absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly at night, the way a Dutch oven stays hot long after you take it off the fire. By September, Henrik had completed the front wall, hung double doors made from hand-split planks, and built the vestibule. The outer door opened to a small chamber, 8 feet deep, where you could stomp snow off your boots and shed wet coats before opening the inner door to the main living space. The chimney drew perfectly. The ventilation worked exactly as he'd calculated, and the interior, even with no fire burning, stayed at 51 degrees, while September nights outside dropped to 38. Samuel Blackfeather came by in early October with 2 dressed deer and a warning. Old man Ortiz lives up by Keystone, says the aspen are showing colors 2 weeks early. Elk are moving down from the high country already. We're in for a hard winter, Mr. Bergstrom, the kind that kills people. Then I'm in the right place, Henrik said, accepting the venison gratefully. They'd been living on beans, cornmeal, and whatever small game the girls could snare. Fresh meat was a luxury they couldn't afford to turn down. Blackfeather studied the cave entrance, the solid stone wall, the carefully fitted doors. You've built something here, I'll give you that. But when it's 30 below and staying there for weeks, when the wind's blowing 60 miles an hour and the snow's so deep you can't get to your woodpile, that's when you'll wish you had a cabin with neighbors close by. Maybe, Henrik said. Or maybe I'll be warm enough to walk 300 yards and check on those neighbors. The old scout smiled at that. You're a confident man. Let's hope it's not the kind of confidence that gets carved on a tombstone. Inside the cave, Henrik had divided the space efficiently. The front chamber, warmed by the fireplace and sealed from outside air, served as their main living area. 28 feet deep, 16 feet wide, with a packed earth floor he'd covered with pine planks. Anna had hung curtains made from canvas to create a separate sleeping area for the girls. The cooking area centered around the fireplace, which Henrik had built with a bread oven to one side and a warming shelf above. Simple furniture, a table, 4 chairs, 2 beds, all built from pine and spruce he'd cut himself. The back chamber, deeper in the cave where the temperature held steady at 48 degrees, became their root cellar. Potatoes, carrots, turnips, onions, all the harvest from their small garden patch, stored in wooden bins and crates. Barrels of salted pork, dried beans, cornmeal, flour. Enough food to last 6 months if they were careful. The natural coolness preserved everything better than any spring house or above-ground cellar could manage. Marcus Webb stopped by on October 23rd, the day after the first serious snow. 3 inches had fallen overnight, not enough to worry about, but enough to make everyone start thinking about winter preparation. You've done good work, he admitted, standing in the front chamber while Anna served coffee from a pot that hung over the fire. I still say you'd be better off in town, but this is more than I expected. Thank you, Henrik said. He'd learned that accepting compliments from men like Webb was part of frontier diplomacy. You didn't argue, didn't boast, just acknowledged and moved on. That said, Webb continued, when the real cold hits, and I mean the kind that froze Jenkins solid in his barn back in '79, you're going to want a backup plan. There's a room at the boarding house. I can arrange a good rate if you need it. We'll be fine. You keep saying that. Webb set his coffee down, half finished. But I've seen men who were sure they'd be fine right up until they weren't. Pride's killed more settlers than Indians ever did. After he left, Anna asked Henrik in Swedish whether Webb might be right, whether they were risking too much. Henrik took her hand and led her to the back of the cave where he'd mounted a thermometer on the wall. 50 degrees, he said. No fire burning. Outside is 31. We could let the fire go out tonight and tomorrow night and the night after that, and we'd still be above freezing. We'd be cold, yes, but not dead, and we won't let the fire go out. November brought more snow, 12 inches in 3 separate storms, and temperatures that dropped to 7 below zero on the worst night. Henrik burned through half a cord of wood that month, keeping a moderate fire going from evening through morning, letting it die during the day when the cave's thermal mass and the thin sunshine were enough to keep the temperature comfortable. The other families in Starvation Gulch burned through 2 cords each, feeding their stoves around the clock. Tobias Crenshaw rode up on December 3rd to check on them, half expecting to find the family huddled under blankets, burning furniture to stay alive. Instead, he found Henrik outside in shirt sleeves, splitting wood in the 40-degree afternoon sun, while his daughters played in the snow. Inside the cave, the temperature held at 68 degrees, warm enough that Anna had bread rising in a bowl near the fireplace. "This doesn't make sense," Crenshaw said, studying the room. "My cabin's a third this size, better insulated, and I can barely keep it above 55 without burning wood constantly." Henrik explained it again, patient as always. The thermal mass, the stable base temperature, the efficient use of the fireplace heat absorbed by the stone walls during the evening radiated back through the night, the vestibule preventing cold air from rushing in every time they opened a door, the natural convection keeping air fresh without wasting heat. "Still," Crenshaw said, "you're vulnerable. One winter this mild, it's working. But if we get a real storm, the kind old-timers talk about, you'll regret being this far from town." 2 months later, Crenshaw would eat those words. So would everyone else. The storm that hit on February 11th, 1883, came out of the north with a fury that caught even Samuel Blackfeather by surprise. The temperature dropped 38 degrees in 4 hours. The wind, already gusting to 40 miles per hour at noon, hit 73 miles per hour by sunset. And the snow, when it started at 3 in the afternoon, fell so thick you couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. In Starvation Gulch, families retreated to their homes and started feeding their stoves. Marcus Webb's frame house, the biggest structure in the settlement, leaked air through a dozen gaps he'd never bothered to seal. By midnight, despite burning wood as fast as he could feed it, the interior temperature had dropped to 41 degrees. His wife and 3 children huddled under every blanket they owned while Webb debated whether to risk the 300-yard walk to Crenshaw's cabin or wait until morning. He waited. That decision saved his life, because anyone who stepped outside that night died. Isaiah Lockett's hired man, a young fellow from Iowa named Peter Schmidt, decided to make a run for the barn to check on the livestock. They found him 17 feet from the door, frozen solid, one hand still reaching for the latch he never touched. Tobias Crenshaw's fine cabin, with its tight chinking and perfect chimney, became an icebox. The wind found every tiny gap, whistling through like the cabin was made of paper. He burned through 2 cords of wood in 24 hours and barely kept the interior above 32 degrees. His wife's hands got so cold she couldn't feel her fingers. His 2 sons developed frostbite on their feet, despite sleeping in their boots. Samuel Blackfeather, who knew more about mountain weather than anyone in 50 miles, had prepared better than most. His cabin, built into a hillside with the back wall sunk 3 feet into the earth, held heat better than the others. But even he burned through more wood in 3 days than he'd expected to use in 3 weeks. The storm lasted 4 days. 4 days of wind that averaged 60 miles per hour with gusts over 80. 4 days of snow that fell at a rate of 3 inches per hour. 4 days of temperatures that never climbed above minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. When it finally broke on February 15th, Starvation Gulch looked like it had been hit by an artillery barrage. Marcus Webb's house had 2 collapsed walls, where the weight of snow combined with the force of wind had simply pushed the framing over. Crenshaw's perfect cabin had held structurally, but he'd burned through 8 cords of wood, his entire winter supply, plus 2 chairs, a table, and the spare bed frame. Isaiah Lockett's place lost its roof entirely. 7 other families had similar damage. The settlement's combined casualties: 1 dead, 11 cases of frostbite ranging from mild to severe, and enough property damage to bankrupt half the residents. 300 yards up the canyon, Henrik Bergstrom's family sat in 72-degree comfort, burning wood at the same moderate rate they'd maintained all winter. They didn't know about the devastation below until the morning of February 16th, when Henrik decided to hike down and check on the neighbors. The snow had drifted 12 feet deep in places, but the canyon wall where the cave sat had been scoured almost clean by the wind. He could walk the 300 yards in regular boots without much difficulty. What he found shocked him. Marcus Webb's house, half destroyed, families huddled in damaged homes burning their last pieces of furniture, children crying from cold and hunger. And in the middle of it all, Tobias Crenshaw organizing rescue efforts with military precision, despite having no feeling in 3 of his fingers. Bergstrom, Webb said when he saw Henrik approach. The man looked like he'd aged 10 years in 4 days. You made it. We're fine, Henrik said. Never dropped below 68 inside. Cave's sitting at 51 right now with no fire at all. The look on Webb's face was something between relief and disbelief. 68. We barely stayed above freezing. Most of us burned everything that would burn and still came close to losing people. He gestured at his collapsed house. I've got 7 folks in here, no heat, and no idea how we're going to make it through the night. Bring them to the cave, Henrik said. All of them. Anyone who needs shelter. Over the next hour, 13 people made the trek up to Henrik's cave. Marcus Webb and his family of 4. Tobias Crenshaw, his wife and their 2 boys. Isaiah Lockett, his wife and their infant daughter. Samuel Blackfeather, who'd come to help with the rescue effort. They arrived half-frozen, exhausted, and completely unprepared for what they found. The front chamber, warmed by a single moderate fire, held steady at 70 degrees. The back chamber, functioning as both root cellar and overflow space, provided another 2,000 square feet of dry, above-freezing storage. Henrik and Anna had food enough to feed everyone for a week. The cave's natural ventilation meant 13 extra people didn't make the air stuffy or smoky. And the thermal mass of the limestone, soaking up heat from the fire and the body warmth of 21 human beings, meant the temperature actually rose 3 degrees over the course of the evening, hitting 73 degrees by midnight. Marcus Webb sat against the cave wall, drinking hot coffee and eating bread Anna had baked that afternoon, and started to laugh. Not a happy laugh, but the kind that comes when you realize just how wrong you've been. I rode up here 6 months ago, he said to Henrik, to tell you this wouldn't work. I was so damn sure I knew better. You knew what worked before, Henrik said. This is different, yes, but not wrong. Just different. Tobias Crenshaw, his frost-damaged fingers wrapped in cloth, shook his head slowly. I built the finest cabin in 3 counties. Perfect square logs, perfect chinking, perfect chimney. And I nearly killed my family because I didn't understand the difference between fine craftsmanship and proper engineering. You understood the principle I missed. What principle? Isaiah Lockett asked. Thermal mass, Crenshaw said. Stored heat. I was trying to heat air, fighting the cold minute by minute. Henrik heated stone and let the stone heat the air. I was bailing water from a sinking boat. He built a boat that didn't sink. Before you think this was just dumb luck, let me ask you a question. How many techniques like this have we forgotten in our rush to modernize? Hit that like button if you think we need to preserve this kind of traditional knowledge before it's completely lost. Samuel Blackfeather spoke up, his voice quiet but carrying weight. My mother's people used caves for storage, not living. I told you that, Mr. Bergstrom. I was wrong. They didn't have iron tools to work stone like you did. Didn't have glass for windows or metal for chimneys, but they understood the principle. They just couldn't execute it the way you did. Over the next week, as Starvation Gulch rebuilt, everything changed. Marcus Webb consulted Henrik on every major decision, adding stone facing to interior walls. Yes. Creating vestibule entrances? Essential. Positioning structures to minimize wind? Absolutely. Tobias Crenshaw spent 2 days studying the cave, taking measurements, asking questions. I'm rebuilding my cabin, he told Henrik, but I'm doing it right this time. Stone-faced walls, better vestibule, and we're building a community storm shelter using your principles. They built it that summer. A partially underground structure with 2-foot-thick stone walls and a pine log ceiling covered with earth. Not as sophisticated as Henrik's cave, but based on the same principles. It held 60 people and could maintain livable temperatures for a week with minimal fuel. Isaiah Lockett wrote to his brother in Pennsylvania that winter, "We came west thinking determination would conquer this land. What we learned is the land only respects understanding." Bergstrom understood stone and heat in a way we didn't. He worked with the mountain instead of against it. The winter of 1883 to 84 was mild, but the lessons stuck. 7 families rebuilt using thermal mass principles. 3 dug partial basements. The community shelter saw use twice, both times proving remarkably comfortable. Henrik Bergstrom lived in his cave until 1897, when failing health forced him to move to Denver with his daughter Martha. He was 68, had survived 15 Colorado winters, and had become a local legend. Visitors would ride up to see the cave house, and Henrik would explain the principles patiently. Marcus Webb wrote about it in his memoirs, published in 1904. I learned more about humility from a Swedish miner who could barely speak English than I did from 2 decades of frontier experience. I thought survival was about strength and determination. Bergstrom showed me it was about observation and adaptation. The mountain had been telling us how to survive for millions of years. We just needed to learn its language. The cave itself stood empty for 12 years after Henrik left. In 1909, a young geologist named Robert Cartwright from the University of Colorado heard about it and made the journey to investigate. What he found fascinated him. The limestone walls, still showing the marks of Henrik's tools, had absorbed and released heat for 15 winters, creating a microclimate that had allowed moss and lichen to grow in patterns he'd never seen before. The temperature inside, with no fire burning and the doors standing open, held at 49 degrees while outside air measured 33. Cartwright wrote a paper about it, published in the Journal of Applied Geology in 1910. Bergstrom's cave, as he called it, became a minor case study in practical thermodynamics. Not famous, not revolutionary, just a footnote in the academic record showing that an immigrant miner with no formal education had successfully applied principles that wouldn't be widely understood in building science for another 30 years. During the Depression, 3 families lived in it simultaneously, surviving winters that drove others out entirely. In 1942, a ranger used it as a weather station, recording interior temperatures that varied less than 8 degrees year-round, while outside swung across 120 degrees. Today, the cave sits on private land, protected by owners who understand its significance. Henrik's stone wall still stands after 142 years. The fireplace still draws. The ventilation still works. And the interior holds steady at 48 degrees, just like when Henrik first explored it in 1882. Modern engineers who study it are impressed by how well Henrik understood thermal mass, convection, and heat retention using nothing but observation and mining experience. There's a broader lesson here that goes beyond one man and one cave in the Colorado Rockies. The American frontier was full of people like Henrik Bergstrom. Immigrants and natives, educated settlers and self-taught homesteaders, all trying to survive in conditions that could kill you if you made too many mistakes. Some of them failed, but the ones who succeeded often did so because they stopped fighting the land and started listening to it. The thermal mass principle Henrik used isn't unique to caves. It's why adobe houses in the Southwest stay cool in summer and warm in winter. It's why sod houses on the Great Plains outperformed frame structures during blizzards. It's why Scandinavian immigrants in Minnesota built their first shelters partially underground before they could afford proper timber. The earth itself, the stone, the soil, all of it stores heat and cold in ways that wood and air never will. You can fight that reality with enough fuel and enough effort, or you can work with it and make your life easier. Henrik Bergstrom chose to work with it. He observed, he calculated, he built, and he succeeded, while men with more experience and better credentials nearly killed their families doing things the right way. His story isn't about genius or luck. It's about humility and attention. He paid attention to what the mountain was teaching, and he had the humility to trust that teaching even when everyone else said he was wrong. That kind of wisdom is exactly what we're trying to preserve on this channel. The forgotten techniques, the traditional knowledge, the practical understanding that kept people alive before we had central heating and emergency services and weather apps. If you want to help us document these stories, help us keep this knowledge alive for another generation, subscribe now. Not because we're entertaining, but because what we're doing matters. In an age where we've automated and outsourced and forgotten so much of what our ancestors knew, channels like this serve as a kind of living archive. Each video, each story, each forgotten technique is a thread connecting us to people who knew how to thrive in circumstances that would kill most of us today. That's worth preserving. That's worth passing on. Henrik Bergstrom never wrote a book, never gave a lecture, never sought fame or credit for what he'd built. He just survived 15 hard winters in a cave in the mountains, raised 2 daughters who grew up warm and fed, and showed his neighbors that sometimes the best solution isn't the conventional one. The mountain had been waiting to teach that lesson for millions of years. It just needed someone willing to learn. And the next time you're absolutely certain you know the right way to do something, the only way to do something, maybe remember Marcus Webb standing in the ruins of his house, watching Henrik Bergstrom walk through 12-foot snowdrifts to offer shelter to the people who told him he was a fool. Sometimes the best teachers are the ones we're too proud to listen to. And sometimes the most important lesson is learning when to stop teaching and start learning. The cave's still there, still maintaining its steady 48 degrees, still ready to teach anyone humble enough to pay attention. That mountain hasn't changed, only we have. We've gotten louder, faster, more certain of ourselves. But the principles Henrik understood, those haven't changed either. They're still true, still effective, still waiting for people wise enough to use them. Maybe that's the real lesson of Bergstrom's cave. Not that one man survived one winter by building something clever, but that the knowledge required to thrive in harsh conditions has always been available to anyone willing to observe, to learn, to trust their own understanding over conventional wisdom. Henrik Bergstrom did that. Marcus Webb learned to do that. And if there's one thing this channel exists to prove, it's that we can do that too. Not by recreating the past, but by understanding the principles that made survival possible and applying those principles to whatever challenges we face. The frontier's closed, the empty land is gone, but the wisdom, that's immortal. As long as someone's willing to teach it, someone's willing to learn it, and someone's willing to prove that what worked in 1883 still works today. Bergstrom's cave stands as proof. Permanent, immovable, true.